Hello, it's your favorite West Virginian out in space, and here I am to talk about the next in the line of the whole reviewing the end of the Wood RPG books. Now, this isn't technically the next one that came out, but I'm viewing the order I want to. So today we're going to review the Alien Invasion book, which, big surprise, is all about alien invasions. Definitely a bit of a mixed bag in my opinion, but we'll cover it. Anyway, so we must start, of course, with War Between the Worlds, or as I'm going to probably mess up, War of the Worlds. This one is probably the closest to the most generic, but it is incredibly fun. At least interesting. Anyway, so the whole premise of it is that mankind accidentally stumbles across the Martians, the gray alien types, and basically, after a little incident, basically the gray aliens think, oh shoot, the humans are coming to attack us. Don't mind them being hypocrites here, but that's not important. So they attack Earth, classic invasion stuff. They're also doing some probing before time that you can play around with. But basically what happens is humanity and them get into a fight. Now, the Martian/gray alien technology is superior to Earth's, but it's not overwhelmingly so. And the physical form of the Martians is less than intimidating. So it's not. So the humanity is on a bit of a back foot, but it's far from losing. Well, it's losing, but it's far from being over. But a communication device is established, and both sides kind of realized this whole thing was a bit of a misunderstanding, and that they didn't really either want to fight each other. So they kind of chill out, and they kind of even become pseudo-allies, or at the very least on decent enough terms. And then, of course, the Reds show up, because it turns out the Greys were attacked by the Reds in a different past, and that's why the Greys act like this, and where they got some of the tech from. And the Reds are something else, man. The Gray aliens are just effectively, Gray aliens. The Reds are these hulking biomechanical organisms that live inside their ships. It's like from another dimension. It's like crazy stuff. And so they show up, and the humans and Martians have to team up to take out the Reds. And that's where the story kind of ends, because, Anyway, overall, let's get to the points. Interest is a 4, or the interest level is 4. Honestly, it's a pretty fun scenario. It has some cool premises, and it unironically, I'll get to that in a bit. Survival is a 4. It's a pretty dangerous, and a lot of people die, but it's not overwhelmingly so. So it gets a 4. Like, there's a decent chance of dying early on, but overall, it's not the worst. Effect is a 3. The ability for the players to do anything directly is somewhat limited. Take out an alien warship here, or get into an alien vehicle that they mentioned a few times. And then, of course, your players could be partially involved in the whole making of the translation device. That could be a big deal, or the stuff you can do, but you're not going to be able to just instantly stop the Red invasion or something. That's just not how the scenario plays out. Let's go into some nice points about it. The nice backstory. I like the lore that we get. It's very interesting, very solid, and very, I don't want to say unique, but fun at least. The cool players. Personally, your players can get to some pretty fun shenanigans, and as it recommends, in case someone, lost their player character in the first wave during the apocalypse rather than the post-apocalypse, then it recommends that you can play a gray alien. Of course, it says, but of course, that would be requiring that you want to play a dry martini drinking, cigar smoking, ray gun wielding alien. But then again, who wouldn't? But regardless of that, and I do have to give it a slight negative here. The lore is a bit sparse in places. It's not the worst thing ever, but I do have to mention it. Overall, a very fun, solid scenario. That if I was going to suggest you run any scenario as like a beginner scenario of doing end of the world games, this is honestly a pretty solid choice. Let's move on to the next ones now. The next scenario is the Brotherhood of Babylon, and this is your reptilian overlords, secretly all the famous people were lizard alien scenario. This one is plays with that concept very straight. It doesn't do a whole lot original, but we'll get into it. Basically, lizard aliens control everything, because an ancient alien race called the Anunnaki, as I'm going to pronounce them, basically showed up on Earth, and because they want damn gold. But, so they get humans to mine it for them. And then eventually they have a civil war in some other sector of the empire. So screw it, we'll leave this dirtbag of a planet. But then they put together half human, half lizard bio creatures, I don't know what you want to call them, mistakes, to basically ruin humanity in secret. And they've been doing it for thousands of years, blah, blah, blah. Everything humans ever did was just an alien plot. You know how this works. Anyway, so basically all that happens, and eventually, partially because the alien plan is to take over, but then again, a human assassin shoots the president, who is shock horror revealed to be a lizard alien, big shock. But, in this scenario at least. But, and basically, blah, 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 the lizard aliens take over, and then after, routinely causing a lot of mess ups, although it does hurt the lizard aliens somewhat, as once the military people realize that they are working for evil lizard people, they tend to defect en masse, which has caused a problem until, they start firing laser sci-fi tech at them. And then the Anunnaki show back up. Oops. And then it gets into the post-apocalypse, where the lizard aliens rule. Well, most specifically the Anunnaki, with the lizard aliens kind of like acting as slightly lower management. Humans are all slaves or eaten or something like that. Long story short, if you're a human, it sucks. But luckily, there is a resistance that's rising up against them thanks to an archaeologist who knew a little bit more about this ahead of time and was able to save herself and knows that a few ideas of how to take them down. Overall, that's the scenario. It's very, very basic. I'm not going to lie. Like, the first scenario we suggested was basic, but it played around with the concept of gray aliens invading. So I have to give it more credit for that. I just do, because it took a simple concept and made it really interesting. The Brotherhood of Babylon really just plays it exactly straight. It doesn't really do much original. But then again, the premise is interesting enough that it can somewhat hold its own. I mean, like, that's why it gets an interest level of 3, in case you're curious. The interest level is 3 for this scenario. Survival is 3. I'm actually going to say it's hard to survive this one because the gray alien one, the previous one, has the whole humanity eventually somewhat declaring white peace with the aliens and then, working together. This one doesn't. Humanity is all either killed off or enslaved. There isn't too much going on in your survival chances. It can get worse, but I also don't know how much I consider living in slavery to be survival. I mean, you're technically surviving, but, it's a whole debate there. Effect is a 4, actually. Both because there's a lot you can do, because it mentions that a lot of people don't follow the lizard aliens when they learn who they are. So theoretically, betraying things early could change events. And it's stated that not every nation is under complete control by the lizard aliens, just most of them. All we know is that America and one other nation in the Middle East was definitely under their control. But we do get mentions that some other nations weren't, or were under much less control. So theoretically, helping to defend them could help, or somehow removing the corruption from a nation before that could help too. And then even after that, one of the plot points of this scenario is that the capital of the new lizard empire on the earth is in Cairo, Egypt. Big pyramids, big guess what. But that the emperor, one of the things that the emperor shows up there, the emperor of the whole lizard empire, and that your players could try to kill him. And that gives you a lot of room because it's just like a shadow of the empire. And you get a few other stuff like that. So the effect is actually slightly higher. You can't necessarily stop the invasion, but you can certainly put dents in it, maybe for humanity. Let's go into the pluses and minuses here. Lots of room for story. There's a lot of room to play around with this. Obviously, it's a bit generic, but it also works in the RPG kind of generic, where there's still room for you to kind of play it, like who rules what, how does it work, that kind of stuff. So I have to give credit. Cool fights. Once again, it gets some really fun suggestions that I just have to admit are pretty cool sometimes. Like fighting off lizard aliens or doing this whole kind of thing and teaming up. But even just that some of the lizard aliens might team up to betray them because they go close to humanity. There's a lot you can do with that. Now let's go into a negative. It makes no sense. It makes no bleeping sense. Okay? I'm sorry, but it just makes no sense, okay? So the assassination reveals that the president was a lizard alien. But they've been controlling for thousands upon thousands of years and no one noticed this earlier? BS. And of course, the whole is they want them gold. Why? Why do you come to Earth for gold? It's one of the worst places to get gold. Oh, and for a last little plus and minus, it suggests that the players could actually be reptiles themselves. I don't know how you want to work that into a game, but, I'm sure there's scalers out there who will appreciate it. Anyway, that's the Brotherhood of Babylon scenario. Let's move on. Rising Tides is the third scenario, and the last of what I call the more generic scenarios, but is by far my favorite scenario in the book, and I'll get into that in a second. Basically, the backstory for this one is that an ancient race of aquatic aliens came to Earth after polluting the heck out of their own planet. So they came here, which was a paradise to them. They worked with humans for a while, but the humans got greedy, quote unquote. But, and basically, so they hid underground and, underwater, actually, ruling the waves secretly and all that jazz. Then around the 1940s, they gave humans technology so they would clean up the environment. But then humans didn't quite fall on their end of the bargain, or at least the higher ups didn't. Of course, I'm going to get into that level of hypocrisy. But, so basically, Atlantis is like, well, screw it, we'll take over the surface world. I'm just replicating the joke like that. But basically, so they flood the Earth, launch their invasion troops, and start building cities where our cities used to be after flooding most of the Earth. And that's pretty much the first scenario. The technology is pretty advanced, but it has so much comparisons to our tech because of whole reverse engineering shenanigans that this both becomes a plot point later, but it also helps you fight them immediately. Also, glass domes filled with water are pretty easy to kill or break open. The post-apocalypse scenario goes with the Atlanteans kind of pretty much in charge, but humanity managed to hold on like the mountainous region that survived, and they've been able to reverse engineer the Atlantean tech to fight back. Overall, so it becomes a situation where humans are actually starting to take back the old cities. Overall, what I think is there. Rising Tides is my favorite scenario in this book. I love it. It is a bit generic, I admit, but I like it so much that I've literally ripped off ideas from it to make my own setting based on some of its concepts. But that's a different story. Anyway, let's get to the actual point of this. In interest level is 6. I must admit, it's generic, but it's also extremely fun, as it gives you this whole character arc you could have, where your homeland gets destroyed, you have to run away from it, and then you fight them back and take it back, like the true chads of humans that we all are, compared to those weak sauce aliens. But it's absolute, it has so many cool details, like reverse engineering alien tech and doing all this stuff and fighting off alien commandos, and just doing all this amazing stuff, and it's epic, and I love it. Survival is a 3. Your chances of surviving aren't the best, mostly because, when New York and all the major cities are currently underwater and only 20% of the land is left, a lot of people got drowned, and that was before any kind of torpedoes or tanks or anything else would kill you. So your survival chances aren't high, especially in the beginning, but there is still the option to fight back, so it's far from the worst. Effect is a 5, actually. Once again, you can't really destroy the Atlanteans, but you can do a lot of stuff in between, really. Take back whole cities, fight off the armies, reverse engineer technology. There's a lot for players to do, if only the rules accommodated it. But overall, it gives you a lot of room to play with. And honestly, I have to be impressed that the overall world's cool for your players. Let's go into the points. Nice backstory for the post-apocalypse. I must specify the post-apocalypse because of the whole, multiple faction war thing. The normal apocalypse one isn't terribly interesting, mostly because the aliens are bloody hypocrites. They are incredibly strong, horrible hypocrites. I don't know if it's a point in the story, but it's my biggest gripe with the setting, actually, this one scenario, is that the Atlanteans are all like, oh no, you can't rise to sea levels, you'll destroy the environment, oh no, you're killing life, and they purposely melt all the ice caps and then flood even more water onto the earth, specifically to destroy all the land. All the ocean currents are gonna be effed up, all the life on the planet, all the life on the land that doesn't know how to evacuate, they're gone. For supposed, we don't want you to mess with the environment, they're complete and utter bloody hypocrites. No wonder they ruined their own planet. They make what we do look pathetic. I mean, geez, it's I hope they're intentionally trying to be hypocrites here. I really hope. Anyway, action missions are the next good point. Tons of adventures. Tons, like I said, I won't go into it again because I said a lot. And the next point is kind of an extension of that. Let's kick them aliens. Because it's one of the few scenarios in the entire line that's all let's go beat up those aliens. Or whatever monster it is this week. Punch it, beat it to the ground, all that jazz. Woo-woo! I really like this scenario. And the negative trait I must point to this one is that the backstory and lore does need some work, both due to, like I said, some weird hypocrisy, but also just because it really needs some more. We don't get a detailed map of what the Earth looks like, which would have been nice. What factions are around, this stuff. This is a problem with a lot of scenarios, but this one especially hurts. It mentions that nations have merged together, but who, what, where? They mentioned that only 20% of the land is left, but what is that land exactly? It's we don't know, it's a bit vague. And I don't know why they do it, but I would like a bit more consistency in the lore. But anyway, that's Rising Tides. Let's move on to the next ones. Skitter is the 4th scenario in the Aliens book, and it is, it's giant bloody ants. You've seen those old B movies of giant bugs? This is it. In fact, I don't even know why this is in the Alien book. Okay, I understand that it's because the ants came from space, but I mean, for crying out loud, giant freaking ants. I've seen enough B movies. They're supposed to be from radiation, ding-a-ling, but whatever. Anyway, I'm gonna be frank with you. I'm just gonna explain it right now. Giant rocks hurl from space. They bring giant ants. They're pretty much exactly like normal ants from Earth, except big and annoying basic laws of gravity. Basically, they show up here, they dig tunnels everywhere, blah, 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 blah. They destroy massive amount of destruction because humans are apparently incapable of squashing a bug just because it grew a few feet. And, but then the post-apocalyptic scenario does actually get interesting, where despite losing seemingly constant battles against giant freaking bugs, but then basically humanity may demand to develop several of their pheromones that we can use to, like, ward them off or trick them to do certain things. And honestly, that's pretty fun. You know what I mean? Like, it does give humanity a fighting chance, although I'd like to think tanks and, laser... We don't have laser guns, really. I mean, we do have them, but I would also like to think, the rail gun. We have rail guns, right? I'm just saying. But basically, it becomes a whole with humanity. A lot of the guns actually do survive, funny enough, just in slightly damaged capacities. But basically, it becomes a thing where you got fortified cities that are protected by the pheromones versus people who aren't inside the pheromone zone, and saboteurs and cults to the Skitter alien ants. They also believe you being Ian is being ascended. But it's not the worst. Let's get on some points, okay? Interest level is 3. They're giant freaking ants, okay? Like, the pheromone stuff makes it a bit more interesting. Some of the points I'll bring up later. But you're only going to be able to make giant freaking ants so interesting, okay? I'm just sorry. It's a personal bias, maybe, but there's a reason we don't see those movies getting remade. I'm just saying. Survival is a 4. I have to conform to this scenario in the story that fundamentally, all that jazz, is that, if, a bunch of human populations die, and I can admit giant tunnels collapsing under you is going to kill you pretty fast, and people who aren't heavily armed are going to have trouble fighting off the ants, but, so, you got decent, a lot of people are going to die, but it's not impossible to survive as long as you're careful. The effect is a 3. There isn't much you can directly do. You can't stop the ants directly. I mean, logically, you don't control massive armies. Although, there are stuff you can do, like you just mentioned, trying to kill off a queen before it makes a new hive, or I would suggest spraying like a nuke or a big bomb with some chemicals and shoving it down one of the holes. So it's not impossible for you to do stuff, okay? And also protecting things, making new chemicals. Let's get on to some pluses and negatives. Well, the first negative is obvious. Big frickin' ants, okay? They're just big frickin' ants. You got warriors, you got workers, you got queens, big frickin' ants, okay? I've said that enough now. I've been done with that now. Plus, I have to give this plus here. They do as much as they can with it without completely making it original or something. So I must give them credit where credit's due. The pheromones is a thing I would not have thought of. Also, plus, riding ants and Ant-Man. It's like, well, not that Ant-Man. It's like, it's references to some of the scenario some of the adventure ideas they have, like you seeing a character who somehow managed to riding in one of the ants like a horse, or a person falls into a vat of experimental pheromones and it feels like a connection to the hive. It's, that's pretty fun, I'm not gonna lie. It kind of feeds back in the second point I gave, but yeah, overall, that's Skitters. It's a very basic scenario. If you like giant ants, you're gonna love it. If you don't like giant ants, you're not gonna like it. Let's move on to the last scenario. Visages is the 5th and final scenario of the Aliens book, and it's kind of a letdown. Basically, Visages is Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It is literally just Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Well, it's more like the whole brand of, theme of movies that aren't all technically connected to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but often parallel each other, and sometimes characters come back, and this weird multiverse of a timeline, they often play off the same ideas, but don't play off each other exactly. Like, they all have slightly different details, but it's changing the central structure of the story. I'm getting onto a tangent. You know what I'm talking about. Basically, alien spores come from some planet that got taken over like this dump. Crash land on Earth, and their little spores infect any living organism they can. They recognize that humans are the best target because other social creatures like a wolf can just detect that something's wrong and kill it immediately. But basically, they take over, and they make they grow a little seed pod after infecting you through the air or water or whatever. And they make a little seed pod of you, kind of thing. Well, the big seed pod. And then after a few hours, your duplicate comes out, naked with no clothes or anything, walks up to you and tries to kill you. Kills you, as the scenario openly suggests. And then take your stuff and try to take your place. And they have all your memories and the part of the hive mind, which is okay there. But also that they don't really have emotions. So, as a quote they give, a gamer might know all the stuff about his favorite RPGs and card games, but he wouldn't have any passion for it. A dead giveaway to any true gamers. I just like that. And basically, they take over the world pretty much quickly. The post-apocalypse scenario technically starts only 50 days after the comet lands. It's Not a good showing for humanity. Like, literally by the end, it's confirmed that at least 85% of humanity has been replaced within 50 days. Jeez, what kind of conservation of energy are they doing here? But, long story short, so basically it's all the classic paranoia of like, oh, have you been replaced? Oh, they're going to replace you. You know how this goes. The post-life scenario gets a bit more interesting, as then it becomes, well, the Visages don't try to be stealthy as much as they used to, because they just don't really need to. They've won, at least in their minds. Humanity survives in some places, but mostly on the saltwater seas, because guess what? Those plant people, they're vulnerable to salt water, or I presume the salt more accurately. But that's just a theory on my part. But basically, so humanity lives on these floating ventillas for the most part, fleets on the water, and lives in constant paranoia. And that's kind of what the scenario is. There does have one interesting detail, but I'll save it for the end. Let's get on to the points. Interest level is 3. It's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I didn't particularly care for that movie. I thought it was depressing, and I think most versions of that movie are depressing and not terribly fun. That's just me, though, but that's just my opinion. Survival level is 1. I have to objectively say, any scenario that has 85% of the population getting knocked off before day 100 is over, you know what I mean? And that suggests that a lot more people died after that. Yeah, your survival chances aren't high, at least by the scenario rules. And effectives are 2. There ain't jack you can do, really, unless you just happen to keep some anti-asteroid defense system in your house, which, you know, if you do, good on you, I guess. But it is technically possible, but I'll save that point for the end. I'll save it for the end. Let's get on to the points, okay? Hive mind. I think the hive mind was a bad development, as then you have to logically break down why killing any of them doesn't immediately lead to all of them swarming you, or how can you do any kind of stealth, or they can just massively communicate. I think it's a bit cheap on the developers' part. I think it would have been more fun if they just were really good at communicating, or had some kind of relay system, but couldn't just instantly know everything with each other. Just in my opinion. Plus, the originals and the new originals. That's just a name for 2 groups that exist in this world of humans fighting back, and I just like it. I just like the detail that the originals came first, and there's the new originals, and I just like the implication of that. Saltwater is the next point. Because, hey, it gives us a definitive way to fight them off, and one that kind of makes sense. The only problem is, it's a pretty exploitable weakness. Like, it's salt water, or more accurately, probably salt. And I have to wonder how it mentions that people often get killed during interrogations, or people wonder when all it would take to prove if someone was one of these is to throw salt in their face. Like, literally just keep a spray bottle filled with salt water, which isn't going to be hard because most people live on giant floating ships in the middle of the ocean, and just spray it in people's faces to be done with it. That, what, was sprayed in the face, you didn't literally start melting? No, definitely not an alien. And yes, I know they state they can use boats, but it does say if they get salt water and they start to decompose immediately. This would be an extremely easy way to figure out who they were, so paranoia shouldn't be a problem when all it takes is a squirt to the face. Or maybe, I don't know, like lace salt into your veins or on a tattoo or something if you want to be really extreme. I wouldn't recommend that, but, you know, whatever works. And of course, the last point I must say is humanity kind of wins this scenario. I say kind of. It's implied that humanity will probably survive this, but it's mentioned that all the Visages die within 20 years of being made, just naturally, and that will allow humanity to take back the planet. It's more a question of surviving that long. Although, to mention that this scenario does pretty heavily imply that the humanity as a whole will make it, it's just that, you know, your players might not make it, which is the real question here. Overall, so just have a bit of a weirdly happy ending, or at least a hopeful one. And that's all the scenarios, really. I can't really say much more. It's a, honestly, if you have to pick up just one book of the End of the World line, the Alien line is the best one to pick up, purely because it has the most consistently good scenarios. None of these scenarios drop below a 3 in interest, in my opinion, which, in my opinion, interest is the most important stat of them all. And honestly, 3 is pretty good, because let me put it this way, like, the second best zombie scenario was a 3 on this list. All the other zombie scenarios were below that. So overall, it is definitely the best book to get. It has some fun ideas and stuff like that I enjoy. Anyway, that's my opinion of the End of the World Aliens book, and I'll see you next time. Yeah? Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscriber. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.